Thank you very much for that kind introduction and warm welcome. I'm delighted and honored to be here to talk to you. I come from Austin, Texas, and I thought that they were warm and hospitable in Austin, but I think the people here are double that, and so I need to shift my threshold on this, but I very much appreciate the warm welcome that everybody's given me since I've been here. Let's get into the topic at hand. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about is conflict in human mating. In particular, focusing on the ways in which men and women torture each other, but also dealing to some degree with the ways in which men torture other men and women torture other women. And I've been studying this topic, the topic of conflict between the sexes and sexual conflict in general, for a number of years. And so in some ways this is a progress report of what I've found. And hopefully it will stimulate some of you to dig deeper into the topic, which I think is quite interesting. And I cover various aspects of it in some of my books. When I first started studying the topic of conflict between the sexes, as I do when I go into territories that are relatively unexplored, I developed a procedure in this case where I simply asked men and women to tell me, I asked women, what do men do that irritate, anger, annoy, or upset you? And I asked men to tell me, what do women do that irritates, angers, annoys, or upsets you? And basically in this first study we found 147 ways in which you can irritate, anger, annoy, or upset a member of the opposite sex. And these range from seemingly minor things like he left the toilet seat up to more violent things, verbal abuse, psychological abuse. Men complained about women being too moody. Women complained about men being condescending, and then also into physical violence and sexual aggression. At the time of this study, and this was about 15 years ago, I felt like I had a pretty good theoretical handle on 2 of the 147 ways in which men and women tortured each other. And so that's why this is in some ways a progress report. I think we have a better theoretical handle on more of the ways in which men and women upset each other, but as you'll find out, there's still a lot that we do not know about the topic. Now, to get into this, I have to first address the historical assumption of harmony between the sexes. And this is, interestingly, an assumption that has been shared by both biologists and psychologists. That is, in biology, it has been viewed that males and females of the same species get together in a harmonious fashion. They cooperate with each other in order to reproduce, and in some cases rear their young, or at least do not inflict damage on their young. And so in biology it's been viewed as a harmonious enterprise. And similarly in psychology, when there's conflict between the sexes or conflict within families, we often view them as dysfunctional. There's something wrong, that there's something that is become dysregulated and needing of repair. Now, this assumption is problematic, as it turns out, and it's, first of all, difficult to reconcile with the observation that sexual conflicts pervade human interactions, human social interaction. I'm going to give you some examples of that. And second, there have been important theoretical developments within the field of evolutionary biology on what's known as sexual conflict theory that have basically identified principles that suggest that conflict is to be expected, that there are regions of conflict throughout all of social living, and not just between males and females, but even between parents and offspring, who you would think should be in sync, but it turns out there are regions where they're not. Parents and offspring, for example, share only 50% of their genes, and so there's a region where their genetic interests are misaligned, so to speak. Now, one can think of 2 broad classes of conflict, of sexual conflict. Intrasexual, intra means within members of one sex, so conflict between males and other males, or between females and other females, and then inter, which means between the sexes, conflict between males and females. And when I speak of conflict between males and females, I mean individual males and individual females. And so I want to just be explicit about defining this, and I define this in a way that Jeff Parker defined it, who's one of the originators of sexual conflict theory, and that is a conflict between the evolutionary interests of individuals of the two sexes. And the reason I stress it, the individuals, is that sometimes when we talk about the battle of the sexes or conflict between the sexes, the image that comes to mind is men as a group in conflict with women as a group. And from an evolutionary perspective, that can't happen for the obvious reason that each individual woman is strategically aligned to some degree with members of the opposite sex, some, her brothers, her father, her uncles, her sons, perhaps her mates, her opposite sex friends, and of course in conflict with some of those members of the opposite sex. And similarly, every man is strategically aligned with some women, okay? His daughters, his mother, his nieces, and so forth, and sometimes mates. So it's critical to keep in mind that we're not talking about group against group, we're talking about individual on individual conflict. Now, sexual conflict, in fact, pervades many social relationships, and I don't have time today to talk about all these, but I just wanted to give you this broader framework so that you can position the areas of sexual conflict that I am going to be focusing on. I'm going to be focusing mainly on sexual conflict in mateships, but just to alert you that sexual conflict occurs in many, many social relationships. Hierarchical relationships, of course, there can be sexual harassment. So, for example, someone in a position of power can get into sexual conflict with a subordinate. Step relationships are notorious for arenas of sexual conflict, in particular stepfathers and stepdaughters. Parents, this is an area of research that we're now just getting into, is the ways in which parents try to influence, manipulate, or control the sexual or mating behaviors of their children, and in particular their daughters. So we have actually a paper that's coming out on daughter guarding, the ways in which parents try to control and influence their daughter's mating behavior, which they do, right? How many women in this room have had their parents try to influence their mating behavior? Okay, so a lot. So good. So I'm on to something there. Coalitions, groups. There's sometimes sexual conflict within groups, and just to give you one example, in the Yanomamo in Brazil, before they go on a war raid, the males who have this warfare coalition, they basically banish females from their presence for that moment, because on the night before a raid, they don't want females present because they cause sexual conflict, because a woman is likely to have had perhaps sex with two men in the group, or perhaps there are two men within the coalition who are in rivalry with one another for sexual access to that female. And so sexual conflict can occur within groups. Opposite sex friendships. How many people have seen the movie When Harry Met Sally? Okay, so some of you, well, this is the classic issue. Can men and women be just friends? How many people think men and women can be just friends? How many people think men and women have trouble being just friends? Okay, so we're almost split. Well, it turns out in our research, the answer depends on whether you're a man or a woman. Men have more difficulty being just friends with their opposite sex friends. Men, we've shown, have a higher propensity to become sexually attracted to their opposite sex friend, and when that attraction is not reciprocated, it causes conflicts and even breakups of opposite sex friendship. And of course, same-sex friends. Friends can become rivals for an individual they're trying to attract. So the